Change of scenery today. Same grade A level quality though. SEC week on YouTube continues today. We're going to rank the coaches. Yesterday I talked about storylines in the SEC as far as division winners and who has chances and who might win or lose. If you haven't checked out that video, check it out. It's a pretty good one. Talked about Georgia, Florida, of course, Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, the barn. Check that out if you haven't seen it. But I've done this for all the other conferences too, ranking the coaches. So today we're going to do that for the SEC. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yep, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, live for you on YouTube today. Change of scenery. I just got tired of sitting out in my grandma's basement or mom's garage, whatever it is you guys are calling it these days. So sitting out back today. Yeah, it's hot, but I don't know, it's kind of a breeze today. It's not that bad out here, actually, in the shade. But anyway, ranking the coaches. You guys know the deal. We're going to do this the same way. I don't rank new coaches in with existing coaches, put those separate. But in the SEC for 2019, no new coaches. We had a lot of coaching changes over the last couple of years, but none from 2018 to 2019. So everybody who coached at an SEC school last year is back this year to give it another try. So let's quit wasting time and just jump right into it. There's 14 teams in the SEC. Number 14, Chad Morris. I know he's only been there 1 year at Arkansas, but let's be real. There's no way to sugarcoat a 2-win season, okay? Arkansas has Brett Bielema. They float around a 6, 7, 8 win mark for what seems like forever under him. They never had a season this bad. Now, people who were trying to be objective and understood what Chad Morris was wanting to do at Arkansas, I think expected them to take a step back last year because of the complete change in offensive philosophy. And I talked a lot about this last season when this hire was made. But, Brett Bielema wanted 350-pound offensive linemen and big, slow running backs who could slam it up the middle 150 times a game. And, he had some success with that. The problem is he came into the SEC at a time, really, where offenses were evolving away from that sort of ground and pound type of offense. You look at what Alabama's doing now, slinging the ball around. Mizzou does it. Auburn from time to time does it when they have a quarterback who knows what they're doing. And anyway, it just never really worked. He was in a tough division over there with defenses like Alabama and LSU and Auburn, like I mentioned. But so to get rid of him, you bring Morris in. You can expect a step back if you want. I don't think anybody was expecting 2 wins. This is absolutely pitiful here. There is no sugarcoating it, like I said. If you're looking for any type of silver lining for Chad Morris in Arkansas, it's that somehow he managed a top 25 recruiting class in 2019, which is huge for Arkansas because of the change in offensive philosophy. Chad Morris wants to spread you out, speed, sling it around, that kind of thing. And like I mentioned, Arkansas just didn't have the guys to do that. So you knew he was going to have to basically turn that roster completely over, and getting a top 25 class whilst winning 2 games in 2019 is pretty miraculous, in my opinion. Now, obviously, a top 25 class is not going to put you anywhere near the top of the SEC, but that's not really the point. The point is he needed to turn that roster over, particularly on offense. And given the fact that he only won 2 games last year, a top 25 class is pretty good. So I expect some improvement from Arkansas this year. And I know 1 year really isn't fair and really isn't a whole lot to go on, but it's all we got. And 2 wins is 2 wins, no matter how you slice or dice it. I've got Chad Morris at 14. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I struggled with 11, 12, and 13. And I'm confident that these next 3 coaches deserve to be ranked 11th, 12th, and 13th. I'm not confident in the order, though. So tell me I'm wrong, switch these around, whatever. But, don't try to tell me any of these next, 13, 12, or 11. Don't try to tell me they're top 10 coaches. I just don't think they are. We'll start with number 13. Ole Miss head coach, is it Matt Luke? A disaster. Now, Ole Miss, he takes over Ole Miss after Hugh Freeze, and of course they were buying every player they could afford and got caught by the NCAA, had some scholarship restrictions. some bowl bans, things like that. So didn't take over an ideal situation, but he's been absolutely terrible, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Ole Miss plays like a Big 12 defense. It's absolutely horrible. By far the worst defense in the SEC, in my opinion. He's been there 2 years, 4-12 against the SEC. That's Tennessee level bad. That's awful. That's terrible. Again, put this in the category of there's no sugarcoating what's going on there, especially when you watch NFL drafts over the last couple of years. And yes, all those players were bought and paid for, but that's not the point. They had NFL wide receivers. They had NFL linemen on both sides of the ball. 4-12 in the last 2 years is pitiful. That's not getting it done. I'm way more confident in Chad Morris taking a huge step forward in 2019 if I'm an Arkansas fan than I am of Matt Luke and Ole Miss taking a huge step forward in 2019 if I'm an Ole Miss fan. I'm not sure this is going to work out in the long run at Ole Miss. Anytime you have a coach like that who gets in some trouble, usually the guy that comes in right after that, not a permanent solution, and I don't think that's going to be the case here for Ole Miss. You're kind of just hoping, I think, that Matt Luke can tread water for you for a few years until sort of the stink and the stain of Hugh Freeze is gone and you can try to get a better coach in there. I don't like Matt Luke as a head coach. I don't think he'll be successful in the SEC, and I have him 13th on this list. Number 12, I have Jeremy Pruitt, head coach, Tennessee. Another guy, only 1 year to go on. No previous head coaching experience anywhere else either, so this was a learning on the ropes type of deal last year at Tennessee with a roster that didn't have elite talent on it, a school and a program that has been sort of the embarrassment of the SEC for the better part of the last 10 years. Tennessee, historically, a pretty good team. Not the case the last 10 years. This isn't a trash talk video. I'm not going to get into, all the bad hiring decisions they made and personnel issues and player development and all that. Everyone knows it is what it is. No one expected Jeremy Pruitt to come in and win 10 games. He went 5-7. That's, I think, what most people expected in terms of overall record. When you look for a bright spot for Jeremy Pruitt, he had 2 wins over ranked teams against SEC teams, right? He beats Auburn on the road, I think that was, and then he turns around and beats Kentucky. Unfortunately, he loses again to Will Muschamp in South Carolina. Tennessee has yet to beat Will Muschamp, whether at Florida or South Carolina. You lose to an average Missouri team. You lose to a bad Vanderbilt team for, I think, the 3rd year in a row. Now, again, all this isn't Jeremy Pruitt's fault, but you make a head coach. You're looking for some sort of improvement. The win total improved from 4 to 5. Are you saying that Jeremy Pruitt is 1 game a year better than Butch Jones? I don't think that's the case. I think he'll improve more this year. A lot of people are going to have problems with me having Jeremy Pruitt this low on this list because he inherited a bad situation, and I get that. But look at the coaches below him on the list, Chad Morris and Matt Luke. They inherited bad situations too. I have them worse than Pruitt. But again, list out all of the reasons you want. That's fine. You went 5-7. That means more than anything else. I took into account other things, like the fact that the roster's not that great. I took those things into account. But again, 5 wins is 5 wins. I've got Jerome Pruitt 12th on the list for this year. I expect him to be higher next year, though. Listen, if Tennessee doesn't make a bowl this year, Tennessee really needs to win at least 7 games this year, in my opinion. Jeremy Pruitt's got to do that, or it's going to be hard for Tennessee fans to be optimistic going forward. You got to win 7 games, but so 12th this year. We'll see where he's at next year. All right, and then 11th, I got Mississippi State head coach. Is it Joe Moorhead? And I considered putting Pruitt ahead of Moorhead. I'll just let you know. I've been disappointed in this guy. I'm a huge James Franklin fan. I get ragged all the time. Oh, Lou, James Franklin's not nearly as good as you say he is. He had some success at Vandy, hasn't done that much at Penn State, which I disagree with. I think he's done pretty good at Penn State, made a Rose Bowl, 10-win seasons. But anyway, the people that tell me I'm crazy about James Franklin always point to Moorhead as the reason why. You just watch, Lou. Now that he doesn't have Moorhead, you'll see they'll be winning 7 and 8 games a year. Maybe. Moorhead comes in, goes 8-5. That's disappointing. You look at Mississippi State, they had a ton of talent returning in 2018 from a 2017 team that spent most of the season ranked. Of course, they lost their head coach after the 2017 season to Florida. Dan Mullen, we'll get to him in a minute. But an 8-5 season to me was disappointing. You lose to Kentucky, you lose to Florida, which I actually think Mississippi State had a better roster than Florida last year. Some people want to disagree, and that's fine. They're pretty close though. But you lose those couple of games, kind of head scratching there. Again, 8-5, is it a terrible season? No, it's not. But considering everything that was coming back there, and sort of the foundation that was laid, I mean, listen, Moorhead took over a much better situation at Mississippi State than Pruitt did at Tennessee, or Matt Luke did at Ole Miss, or even Chad Morris did at Arkansas. And the record reflects that, I think. He won 8 games, going 8-5. None of those 3 coaches I listed below him on this list had an 8-win season. But you expected more, I think, last year. That's why I have him so low on this list. But at number 11, I've got Mississippi State head coach Joe Moorhead. All right, top 10 time. There's going to be a lot of disagreement on these, and I understand. Number 10, I've got Derek Mason. Some people are going to think he doesn't deserve to be top 10 on here. No winning seasons at Vanderbilt, but he's made a couple of bowl games. And listen, when you're judging these coaches, it's hard and not necessarily fair in a lot of cases to go solely on number of wins. Yes, that has to factor in, because in the end, that's the ultimate goal, is to win games. But Vanderbilt is historically a 5 or 6 win team. He's been a little bit better than that. When I say no winning seasons, it's a couple of 6-6 seasons where he made a bowl game and, but lost, finished 6-7. So that's technically not a winning season. Vanderbilt has come close a couple of times to really upsetting some of the big boys. In fact, they did beat Georgia back in 2016, Kirby's first year. They almost beat Notre Dame last year, which was just a crazy game. They outplayed Notre Dame, really, and probably should have won that game to let it get away from them late. That game was on the road in South Bend. And then the Florida game last year, they were winning that game at halftime and really dominated the first half. Florida came back in the second half and won. Vanderbilt had an injury in that game that really hurt them, that Keyshawn Vaughn. But you get him back this year. Listen, anytime Vanderbilt has a coach that's about 10th in the SEC, you're doing okay. I'm not going to sit here and knock Vanderbilt. There's just not a team that you need to be trash talking for any particular reason. A loyal Vanderbilt fan on this channel, Jared, calls in on the live shows all the time. I'm not knocking Vanderbilt, Jared. There's going to be a lot of people who think he shouldn't be 10th, that he should be 11th, 12th, 13th, or even 14th. Again, I have him where I have him here. I'm doing my best to give you the reasons why. I'm not saying my list is better than anyone else's list. This is just where I came down, but I've got Derek Mason, number 10 head coach in the SEC. All right, number 9, I got Barry Odom at Mizzou, and this is another one that I struggled on because Mizzou is just a weird team to figure out. They've blown out Florida the last 2 years. I mean, completely annihilated them. Almost 100 points, or 1,500 something yards almost combined in those 2 games. Now, 2 years ago, Florida was terrible, and a lot of teams beat them. But last year, Florida was a pretty good team. And Florida fan talks about that Kentucky loss early in the season that they took it home, and they say, well, it was early in the season. We were a different team late in the season than we were in the beginning of the season. I agree with you. And of course, late in the season, you got blown out by Georgia and blown out by Missouri. So is Missouri just a better team than Florida? Is Barry Odom a better coach than Dan Mullen? Well, I obviously don't think so, because I haven't got to Mullen yet on this list, and I've got Barry Odom at 9. But I mean, a couple of years ago, Mizzou starts out like 0-4, 0-5, something like that, and then wins like 6 of their last 7 games. Last year they looked like a great team at times. Drew Lock, a couple of NFL receivers, defense iffy. Of course, this year they bring Kelly Bryant in, so a lot of people are going to be interested in keeping an eye on Missouri. And if you look at Missouri's schedule, and if I can remember, I'll put it up on the screen right now. I hope I can remember. They have a pretty good possibility of being undefeated when they play Florida. I mean, Missouri does not have to be a great team to start this season 5-0, 6-0, something like that. If you look at this schedule, it sets up really, really good. South Carolina, make what you will of them. But they've got a chance to really make some noise the first half of the season. If Kelly Bryant comes in and can elevate that offense a little bit, maybe give them something they didn't have with Drew Lock, which is some runaround ability, and the defense can play a little bit better than what it's played. And the main thing with Missouri, I think, is you can't start off slow out of the gate like you tended to do, especially a couple of years ago. And you got to be more consistent. I mean, you can't look like a top 25 team and blow Florida out and then turn around and these 60-something to 58 games with Southeastern Missouri State and stuff like that. It's just hard to figure out. Do I think Barry Odom is a elite level top half of the SEC coach? No. Do I think he's the worst coach in the SEC? No. This is where I came down with him, but I have him ninth on my list of SEC coaches. All right, number 8, I have Will Muschamp, head coach, South Carolina. Florida, utter, complete, total disaster. Takes a year off, defensive coordinator at Auburn, before getting the job at South Carolina after Steve Spurrier quit halfway through the season after Georgia put 50 points on him at Sanford Stadium. We all know that story. Muschamp comes in. Hasn't been great, hasn't been terrible. I actually read something researching this video that surprised me. Will Muschamp has more wins in his first 3 years at South Carolina than any other South Carolina coach in history. I've been hard on Will Muschamp. I think deservedly so. They've lost some games that you sit back and go, I mean, they haven't beat Kentucky in what, 5 years? I mean, so they've lost some head-scratching games here lately. And then you take last year, a top 10 Florida team, again, another team like Vandy that had Florida beat, and you let them come back and win that one. I do not think Will Muschamp is an elite level coach. I don't think he ever will be. That's not necessarily a trash talk thing against Will Muschamp. And I know I have the jokes about how, oh, Will Muschamp works for UGA, always has. We just send him around to tear these programs down or whatever. I just don't think he has it as a head coach. At least not on the level of some of the upper echelon coaches, not only in the SEC, but across college football. I just don't ever think he'll be an elite level coach. I can't see Will Muschamp ever winning a conference title anywhere. Now, for South Carolina, does that mean they should get rid of him? That's a decision South Carolina is going to have to make. Of course, they have famously never won the SEC. They've come close a couple of times, winning the division. Once, I guess, several 11-win seasons under Spurrier. Muschamp has yet to get them to that level. But if you look at Spurrier's first 3 years, like I mentioned in Muschamp's first 3 years, Muschamp has actually had a better first 3 years. That's the good news. The bad news is, I already mentioned winless against, who is it? Clemson. I don't think Muschamp has beat Clemson yet. But then you look, okay, you're 1-11 against these 4 teams under Muschamp. Clemson, Texas A&M, Florida, and Georgia. Unfortunately, you play those 4 teams every single year. Texas A&M is the team that you draw from the West every year. And, of course, Georgia and Florida are SEC Eastern rivals, so you play them every year. And Clemson is your in-state rival. You play them at the end of every year. So those are 4 pretty important games. Will Muschamp is 1-11 against those 4 teams. Now, obviously, in the case of Georgia and Clemson, they've been elite-level teams over the last couple of years, and it's really no shame in losing to them the last couple of years. But Texas A&M, you look at some of the seasons they've had, kind of surprising. You haven't found a way to get a win against them. Florida, they won the East a couple of times with McElwain, but let's be real, they were not good teams the years they won the East. And then they had, a couple of seasons ago to 4-win season. Anyway, you're 1-11 against those 4 teams under Muschamp. You got to get that turned around, I think, if Muschamp ever wants to be any higher on this list of SEC coaches. Do I think he's terrible? No. Do I think South Carolina is going to fire him anytime soon? I honestly don't. Not even if they have a bad season this year. Their schedule's absolutely brutal. They host Alabama, play on the road at Georgia, then they play Clemson at the end of the year. So you play the top 3 teams in America this year. On top of that, you have to play Texas A&M, who I think is a legit top 15 team. You got to play Florida, who I think is a legit top 15 team. Now, some Florida fans think they're top 10, which, by the way, they lost another player today. Congratulations, Brian Edwards entered transfer portal. Let me guess, you don't need him. He wasn't going to play. He's not any good. The freshmen are better. I know all the excuses. Bottom line is you may not have enough players to start the season. You might have to just go ahead and forfeit the entire season, which would be great for Will Muschamp to go ahead and get him his second win against one of those 4 teams that I mentioned. But anyway, I got Will Muschamp number 8 on this list. All right, number 7, I got Coach O, Ed Orgeron. Some people are going to say this is low, and if all you look at is last year, fine. Maybe it's a little low based on just last year, okay? He's won 10 games in 9 games. You can't just forget that he lost to Troy, though. I'm sorry. No matter how hard you try, you can't forget that. That did happen, okay? That did happen 2 seasons ago at home. Never won the division. Now, he's only been there a couple of years in terms of full-time head coach, so I get it. And I get it that Alabama's in that division too, okay? So is Gus Malzahn. He's found a way to win it a couple of times. So, if you want to be considered ahead of either one of those 2 guys, win the division, okay? I get real tired of Dan Mullen apologists And Ed Orgeron, apologist, telling me, well, it's not their fault they can't win the division because they're in the division with Alabama. But then Gus Malzahn has won the division twice. Now, keep in mind, Dan Mullen fans and Ed Orgeron fans will point and laugh at Gus Malzahn all the time about what a terrible coach he is. But he somehow tripped his way into winning the SEC West a couple of times. Ed Orgeron has not done that yet. Now, LSU's got high expectations this year. They got to travel to Alabama. Talked about that a lot on yesterday's video. I think LSU could be a really good team this year. I don't see them beating Alabama. I just don't. I think their defense played probably the best game you can play against Bama last year, holding them to 29 points. Clemson played pretty good against them too. Although Alabama gets crapped on for that Clemson game, and deservedly so. 44-16 is an embarrassment. Alabama did move the ball in that game though. They just couldn't score once they got down to the end zone. Anyway, I'm not rehashing that. But the point is, LSU's defense played really well in that game last year, and the offense just was non-existent. And that was the best LSU offense last year that we've seen since probably Jamarcus Russell. I think it'll be a little bit better this year, but you got a 29-point gap to make up against Alabama. I don't see you doing that on the road in Tuscaloosa. I think you're probably going to come up a game or two short in the West again this year. But I've got Ed Orgeron 7th on this list. All right, 6 is Dan the Muffin Man. Not the Muffin Man, the Mullen Man. He's a Florida man, woo. He's a Florida man, woo. Yeah, we get it. He's a Florida guy, Dan Mullen. I've got him 6th on this list. People are going to cry, and I get it. Listen, he's got 24 wins in his last 3 seasons, okay? That's an average of 8 wins a season. Oh, he was at Mississippi State, Lou. Okay. Mark Stoops, who I haven't got to yet, also has 24 wins in the last 3 seasons. Guess where he's at? Kentucky. Okay, so again, these Florida fans who say, well, it's not Mullen's fault. He played in the West. It's hard there. And Mississippi State's not traditionally a football school. Never mind the fact that Mississippi State won the West before Dan Mullen got there, but couldn't win it with Dan Mullen. Stoops, same number of wins the last 3 years as Dan Mullen. And Stoops has been at Kentucky all 3 of those years. Perennially one of the worst teams in the SEC and America. 24 wins in the last 3 seasons, same as Dan Mullen. So I've got Dan Mullen 6th on this list. He's been a head coach in the SEC for 10 years, 0 division titles. Loses at home last year to Kentucky for the first time in 31 years for Florida, anyway, right? Blown out by UGA, your rivalry game. Blown out by Missouri for no reason. Mullen got blown out the year before that by UGA when he was at Mississippi State. Listen, the top 5-6 coaches in the SEC are all pretty good. I would put Mullen in that category. I think 6 is fair for Mullen right now, though, based on what he's done over almost 10 years in the SEC. It's like I said, Florida fans love to laugh at Gus Malzahn. He somehow managed to win the West twice. Mullen was in the West for 7 or 8 years and couldn't do it. Now he's in the East and he can't do it. They finished 3rd in the East last year. Florida fans are happy as hell about it. I don't understand, but they are. You finished behind Georgia and Kentucky in the East. Yes, you won 10 games. Congratulations in the New Year's Six Bowl. That's great. I've got you 6th on this list, and like I said, there's legitimate reasons of why everyone ahead of Mullen on my list is ahead of him. Starting with the number 5 coach on my list, Mark Stoops at Kentucky. They each have 24 wins over the last 3 years, and Mark Stoops beat Dan Mullen last year. That's why I have Stoops at 5 and Mullen at 6. You look over the last 3 years, all 3 of those years for Stoops were at Kentucky, traditionally a basement-dwelling school, 24 wins in the last 3 years. Dan Mullen, 24 wins in the last 3 years. 2 of those years at Mississippi State, traditionally not a football powerhouse, but last year at Florida. I'm sorry, same number of wins here, and Stoops beat you head-to-head last year. You got to play on the road there early in the season this year, and Kentucky thinks they can beat you again. If I'm wrong, then beat Kentucky this year. I'm almost willing to bet that if Florida finds a way to beat Kentucky this year, then next year when I do this list, these 2 names will probably be flip-flopped. And if Mullen does something more than that, wins a division or something, he may even move up higher on the list. But I'm pretty sure even if Kentucky and Florida have similar seasons or whatever, if Mullen can find a way to beat Kentucky this year on the road at Kentucky, he'll probably move ahead of them. But let's be real. Same number of wins over the last 3 years, and you lost to him last year. So I've got Mark Stoops at number 5. Number 4, I've got Gus Malzahn, and this brings me to a point I want to make before I get into the top 3 after we talk about Gus Malzahn at number 4. Winning matters. I get it. The school you're at can limit you sometimes. The players you're able to get can limit you sometimes. Injuries during the course of a season can limit you and hurt you sometimes. There are a wide variety of variables that go into which coaches are successful and how successful they are and when that success occurs. I understand that. The bottom line, winning matters. And what you win matters. I hear from people all the time that don't want to give Georgia any credit for anything they've done over the last couple of years because they haven't won a national title. And yes, that is the ultimate goal, is to win a national title. And I understand that. But there are things you have to accomplish along the way to get there. Is it possible to win the national title without winning a division or a conference? Yes, it's possible if you've got the kudos built up over time to even get into the playoffs in those scenarios, like an Alabama and a Clemson. And of course, it's no point making this argument with those schools because they have won national titles recently. Gus Malzahn at number 4 has found a way to win the SEC West and the SEC. He's played in a national title game. Had Florida State beat in 2013 at halftime. They were up 3 scores on Jameis Winston and the undefeated Seminoles in 2013 in that national title game, and Florida State had that epic comeback in the second half and beat them. Malzahn's had some terrible years at Auburn, and that's one of the reasons he's 4th on this list and not any higher, and likely not to get any higher, in my opinion. I think he's probably peaked in terms of what he's going to do at Auburn. But he won the West a second time in 2017 and, of course, lost in the SEC title game to Georgia. That's why he's ahead of people like Stoops, like Mullen, and like Orgeron. I would put Stoops, Mullen, and Orgeron in a similar category at this point. I would put the Moorhead, Morris, and Luke in a similar category. Pruitt, Odom, Muschamp in a similar category. Mullen, Stoops, and Malzahn, way above average coaches. All 3 have reasons and excuses, some legitimate, that they can point to as to why they haven't done certain things or whatever. But in the case of Mullen and Stoops and Orgeron, no division titles. You got to get one if you want to pass somebody who does have one. And everybody else, the top 3 coaches on this list, all have division titles, conference titles. 2 of them have national titles. 2 of them have playoff wins. Okay, so anyway, I've got Gus Malzahn at 4. I'm doing my best to explain the reasoning why Malzahn is 4, Stoops is 5, and Mullen is 6. Listen, believe me, I have people arguing me over the Big 12 and the Pac-12 coaching rankings. I already know I'm going to be an idiot who's never seen a football game in the comment section of this video. I already know because this is going to be, no one is going to agree with everything on this list, and everyone is going to disagree with something. So I already know, but I'm just doing the best that I can to explain why I have these coaches where I do. Winning matters, and what you win matters. That's the ultimate goal, and it has to mean something. And that's why I have Malzahn at 4. That's also why I have Kirby Smart at 3 and not 2. There are some coaching lists you can find in the SEC that will put Kirby Smart at 2. And Kirby Smart is probably better positioned right now to win a conference or a playoff game or a national title than Jimbo is at Texas A&M. But Jimbo has already done it, and that has to mean something. I know what happened at another school, Florida State. I know Florida State's in the toilet now, but the reality is he had an undefeated season, a conference title, and a national championship in 2013. He made a college football playoff in 2014 after winning the conference for the 2nd year in a row. This was the ACC, of course. He then lost in the first round of the playoffs to, I believe, Oregon. That was the first year of the playoffs back in 2014. But the point is, he has won it all. He has a ring, okay? Kirby does not. So I've got Kirby at 3rd. Kirby had a rough first year. It was his first year as a head coach, right? A lot of Tennessee fans are pointing to Kirby Smart's first year at Georgia as a reason to be optimistic about Jeremy Pruitt. And there is some truth to that. I do believe it's hard for first-year coaches to have a lot of success. Lincoln Riley has been the exception to the rule. right? And now everybody points at Lincoln Riley and thinks they're going to go 15-0 the first year they hire a coach from within. Hello, Ohio State and Ryan Day. How are you doing? Yeah, we'll see if Ryan Day can do it. Is Ryan Day going to be a Kirby Smart situation, a Jeremy Pruitt situation, or a Lincoln Riley situation? I'll let you decide. But we'll know for sure here in a couple of months, won't we? Yeah, we will. But I've got Kirby at third. Rough first year, 8-5, 8 wins. Year 2, 11-1 in the regular season, undefeated against his division. The only loss coming on the road against the SEC West. Wins the SEC championship, makes the playoffs, beats Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, and then goes on to lose the national championship game to Alabama in overtime. 2018, an almost near repeat. 11-1 in the regular season, their only loss coming on the road to an SEC West team, then losing to Alabama, this time in the SEC championship game, in an epic second half collapse that we've all, that is what it is. So, what has Kirby done? 2 straight years, swept his division. 2 straight years, won the division. 2017 wins the SEC. 2017 makes the playoffs. 2017 wins a playoff game. 2018 wins the division again, loses the SEC championship game. That's why I have Kirby ahead of Malzahn. He's made a playoff. He's won a playoff game. He's better right now than Malzahn. I mean, listen, Kirby and Malzahn in terms of accomplishments, pretty similar. Malzahn's had a much longer time to accumulate those accomplishments than Kirby has, but their accomplishments are pretty similar. I have Kirby ahead of Malzahn because I think he's better positioned now to add to that than I think Malzahn is. Malzahn could be on the way out at Auburn. Let's just be real. Even though I've got him as the 4th best coach here, I think it's going to be a rough year for Auburn. And the fans are just out of patience with him, and some of the administration not happy with the big raise and stuff that he got under the previous boss there. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on Auburn, especially the second half of this season if they're losing some games. But this is why I've got Malzahn at 4, Kirby at 3, and of course Jimbo at 2. Now Jimbo at Texas A&M, the schedule is brutal this year. Texas A&M could be the best 7-5 team in history this year. Jimbo Fisher's a good coach. He's recruiting well at Texas A&M. He's getting the most out of the talent that's already there. He improved them his first year there. They're only going to get better going forward, in my opinion, under Jimbo Fisher. If you're asking me over the next 5 years, I think Jimbo Fisher is the best chance in the SEC West to surpass Nick Saban. Retirement is probably the only thing that has a better chance of beating Alabama in terms of Nick Saban over the next 5 years than Jimbo Fisher does. I like him against Nick Saban over the next 3 or 4 years more than I do Orgeron or Malzahn or whoever Auburn ends up hiring after Malzahn. That could get interesting in a hurry. Texas is a recruiting hotbed. Jimbo Fisher has proven that he can work with elite players and get the most out of them. I've got him at number 2 because of his previous accomplishments at Florida State. And listen, if Texas A&M goes 8-4 this year, it's going to be hard to hold that against Jimbo Fisher when you look at their schedule, which I detailed yesterday. They play the top 3 teams in America, 2 of them on the road. Plus they play LSU. I mean, it's just a brutal schedule. And of course, Nick Saban, number 1, no one's going to argue that. I mean, the only argument when it comes to Nick Saban right now is him versus Dabo. I still have Saban ahead of Dabo. Obviously, Clemson is a better team right now than Alabama. No one can dispute that. 44-16 will tell you that. But Saban's been doing what he's doing at Alabama for 10 years, steady, with no drop-off or decline. Losing a national championship game is not a drop-off or a decline, okay? And they're going to be right back in the hunt this year in 2019. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. Now, Clemson will too. Can we get to the point where you could say Dabo should be moved ahead of Saban on a Mount Rushmore of college coaches? Maybe, but in my opinion, Dabo's got a long way to go to pass Saban in terms of overall hierarchy of coaches throughout college football or whatever. Clemson definitely the better team right now, not knocking Clemson at all, but come on, look at what Saban's done over the last 10 years. I think that trumps what Dabo has done over the last 3 or 4 years. Clemson, obviously the hotter team right now, winning 2 of the last 3 national titles, right? Won the ACC 3-4 years in a row, made the playoffs every year. Not knocking Clemson at all. But in terms of who's a better coach overall, I mean, Saban might be the best of all time, ever. Can Dabo surpass that? Maybe if he wins 3 or 4 more national titles. We'll see. But that's the top 3. Kirby, Jimbo, Nick Saban. All right, guys. I know that I know I'm gonna get a lot of heat for this. I'm prepared for it. Whatever. Let me have it in the comments section. I think my list is fair, and I think there are legitimate points behind each one of my rankings. With that being said, there's obviously legitimate points and arguments that can be made for some of these coaches to be moved up or down the list, and I understand that. So anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. We'll be back tomorrow with another SEC video. Have a great morning.